So I'll do my best to kind of give a little bit of framework for the Gospel of Luke, but at the same time, I do think there's something in particular that I want to say this morning about this opening prologue to the Gospel of Luke. And so if you have this paper, just take 2 minutes and read this on your own quietly, and then we'll, as is our custom, we'll have a discussion about it. So read these first 4 verses. There should probably be enough time. So make a group. Just kind of turn to some people. Could just be 2 of you, but maybe get crazy this morning and make it 3 or 4 even, if you're feeling wild. And talk about it. What do you mean? Oh, don't do it. It's up to you. Excellent. Okay. All right, let's hear some of your observations or questions. What do you notice? What stands out to you? Yeah.
Luke himself investigated the word. He investigated what was said himself. Figured it out for himself.
Really good. Yeah, so this is like a big story, but he's saying, I personally looked into it. I personally asked questions. Now, it's important to note that Luke wasn't an eyewitness, right? So he's not one of the 12. He wasn't there from the beginning. He wasn't there at Pentecost. And so for him to be able to tell the story of Jesus, the stories of Jesus, he would have had to have gone and asked the eyewitnesses. And what's interesting is, because he isn't an eyewitness, he isn't Matthew, for example, because he isn't an eyewitness, he can't just rely on his own memory. And so he has to get multiple sources. And that maybe is a unique feature of Luke's gospel, that he's actually trying to ask everybody what it was like. So when Matthew explains what happened that day in the Sermon on the Mount, he's also asking the other guys who were there, what did you hear? And what was it like for you? Or what do you remember Jesus saying? So it's an interesting distinction maybe for Luke. What else? Yeah.
Similar to what y'all talked about last week, he's taking personal interest in one, Theophilus. He's writing it for his benefit, for his account.
That's really good. Yeah, and we don't really know who this person is, Theophilus. We don't know if maybe he's the sponsor, like he's sort of like paying for it, maybe, possibly, or he's part of the group of people that is saying, hey, we want you to write this. We're commissioning you to write this 2-volume history. Or it's a person that he knows. I mean, the name itself would have been a common name, but the name Theophilus means lover of God. And it could have been a person's particular name. So it's possible he is speaking to a person he knows by name. But it's also possible that this represents a certain kind of person. There was a group of Gentiles who actually were fond of the sort of Jewish faith. And they would come around synagogues, often funding synagogues, and they were referred to by Jews as God lovers, the lovers of God. So they were not themselves Jews. They could not convert to Judaism, but they found truth in Judaism. And so they often were financial donors or sponsors to synagogues or local kind of work for the people of Israel. And it's possible, too, that there's a little bit of a nod that he's actually saying, I'm writing this book to those people, to Gentiles who are open to the revelation of a Jewish Messiah. Jeremy. Yeah, it does feel like he's aware that he is not the first guy to do this, and he's trying to add something to the compendium, to the canon here, which is, it's a problematic thing, and I actually want to talk more about that. Like, who has the balls to say, I'm going to write a new gospel? Like, the other ones aren't good enough. It's been a while since I said balls from stage, so I think people are feeling some kind of way right now. A little weird. Guts. Since he had the guts to, I mean, it takes a certain hubris, chutzpah, better, there you go. A certain hubris to say, Matthew's gospel and Mark's gospel weren't good enough. I think I should write one. Who does that? Who thinks that, Okay, Scott.
I just think that, knowing he was not a eyewitness, don't reporter, and he has multiple takes on things. When I'm challenged with my faith, typically broken down by the one, that doesn't believe. Why, well, you weren't there, and I don't see factually how can you believe in something like this. And so this gospel is kind of like that, where he wasn't there, was an eyewitness,
Yep.
and yet it's true to him, and you weren't there, and yet it's our responsibility to share Christ with others based on what they're from.
I think that's such an important point. In other words, Luke represents our interaction with the gospel because Luke wasn't there. And so he is the first generation of people to say, I can know, understand, and tell this story with authority, even though I was not there. You understand there would have been a distinction also almost between the eyewitnesses, the people that actually saw Jesus. Imagine you live in a time when there are people still alive who were around Jesus, who were at the Sermon on the Mount, or who saw him feed the 5,000, who actually took bread from that basket and ate it. And there would almost be this kind of two-class system, people who were there and people who weren't there. And Luke is stepping into this, really the world we exist in, which is like we weren't there and we don't know anybody who was there. And yet he's saying, I can put together an orderly account, almost like a scientific approach to a modern historical approach to saying this actually happened. We can prove it, and then we actually can be certain of what we've been taught. That's his final idea there. Really good, really important point. Anything else? Okay, Ryan. Yeah. 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 Amen. But it implies something too, doesn't it? To say that he wants to write something so that you might feel certainty. What does that imply? That you don't always feel certain, right? Does anybody ever doubt? Anybody ever struggle with doubt? Oh, you don't raise your hand because you're not. Okay, I understand. So if you have ever struggled with certainty of the things that you've been taught, what do you do? And the Gospel of Luke is an answer to that question. He means to answer that question. And I'll get into that in a second. Here's what I want to do. I want to give you, because there's a certain kind of obligation I have to this prologue to, treat it correctly. So I'm going to do that as quickly as I can. And then there's something I think nestled in here which is important just for us. And so if you'll allow me, I'm going to take liberty a little bit and talk about that. This is, of course, a preface for a gospel, for a book, and so it has to be read that way. It is a prologue, a preamble. It's an explanation of the writer's motives and intentions and his distinctiveness. What will he offer us which has not been offered before? And so in a way, the prologue here is a label. It describes what is coming next, what's inside the jar, what's inside the bottle. This is his label, letting us know what we're about to read and what is inside. And a good label is a gift to the user. A good label lets you know what's inside. And labeling is important. Labeling can be a problem, it can be bad, but it can be very helpful. It can let you know what good, great things are coming. It could also let you know some kind of warning. Monica saw recently, we were driving in our neighborhood, and sometimes people just put things on the street, just garbage, and there was a big mattress, and I'm not sure why any human being would grab a mattress from the side of the road and think, oh, look, a free mattress. I mean, would anyone do that? It's just utterly disgusting. But in case somebody was so desperate for a mattress that they would take a mattress that had been sitting outside on the side of the road in my neighborhood, anybody would be that desperate to take a mattress. This person graciously wrote in Sharpie on the mattress, bed bugs, which is helpful. Unless, of course, you wanted a mattress with bed bugs, in which case it's also still helpful. It lets you know what you're getting if you grab this mattress. I don't know why anyone would grab a mattress by the side of the road, but in case you're that crazy, this one has bed bugs, just so you know. There are good labels and there are bad labels. I actually found a couple things I want to show you. Maybe we could put these pictures up here. Some labels which I thought were probably helpful, maybe. So this one's a problem. This is, for me, I just think this is a problem. Why would you sell something to kids, it says golden shower fountain, but what is it? It's fire. It's not a fountain, it's fire. and you don't want to shower in it, and you don't want your kids showering in it. So that's maybe a bad label, maybe not a good label. What's the next one? This isn't... This is a hot drink. Good label, bad label. I'm assuming it's a bad label. What about the next one? It says it's a strong cleaner. What about the next one? I really love this one. This is... It's out of this world. It's out of this world. And some, maybe it's a mistake, but maybe it's a helpful warning. What about this next one? Maybe that's a spelling error. But look at her. She looks like she may have pooped in the pool. I pooped in the pool. Poop up pool. I'm assuming that it's supposed to read pop up pool, which for those of you that can't spell, that would be 1 O, not 2 O's. Okay. Now, recently, I have a little bit of a, I guess you could say maybe an image problem, or I don't know what exactly to call it. Like people think I'm, what's the word? Scary or difficult or intimidating or mean. I don't think mean probably is what people would say, but off-putting, I don't know. So I'm always trying to think, okay, how can I be softer? Like Jeremy's had this problem too. Jeremy used to always have all these conflicts through his email. Like he would write emails and people would be offended by his emails. So he started putting smiley faces in all his emails. If you've ever gotten an email from Jeremy, there's a smiley face in every email. Even when it's not necessary, he's just going to put a smiley face in there because he thinks, how do I kind of soften what he's not aware that he's coming off kind of harsh or whatever. And I have that problem too. So we recently started using Slack. We use it for our team, but we use it for other things too. So I just thought, for Slack, what should my face be? What should my icon or my what's it called? My avatar, my whatever. What should my image be? So I chose Grover. This is what I chose. That was because I thought, okay, if you're getting like a thing from me, you work for me, let's say, and you get what could be interpreted as a harsh thing, like did you do this, or where are you? This is the one everyone gives me a hard time about when I write where are you. The people start getting cold sweats and they think, what have I done? And I'm just literally sometimes just asking. I was wondering where they were. But it comes off kind of harsh. So I just thought, that's me. That's Grover. I'm just trying to say that's who I am. I'm trying to label me. And so you get that same text. Doesn't that feel better? No? You can't read that text negatively. You can't read it like, Grover doesn't mean you any harm. He loves you. He literally just wants to know where you are so he can give you a hug or say good job. Anyway, I don't know if it's working. Is it working? Anyone? No? All right. Let's move on. How is Luke labeling his gospel? It's important to know a little bit about this person, this man. He is bright and educated. In fact, he has some of the best Greek, probably the best Greek in the New Testament comes from Luke Acts. He is referred to by Paul as his friend, the physician. Now, physician wouldn't have necessarily meant a medical doctor, but it would have meant someone highly educated who understood biology and so on. So it doesn't mean he was necessarily a medical doctor. That's a little bit of a misunderstanding. But he would have been, maybe the closest thing would say he had a PhD, or he was at a doctorate level of understanding. And so he's thought to be educated. He probably was a Gentile, Greek educated. So that makes him a Gentile convert, which is unique to hear from him in the canon of the New Testament. He would have been the missionary companion of Paul, a good friend of his, someone that Paul picks up along the way. He wasn't one of the original 12, so he wasn't an eyewitness to Jesus, but he was one of the first missionaries. He was an eyewitness to one of the first 3 missionary journeys that people ever took. And so he has that unique view. And he can talk about, so when you read the book of Acts, you'll see that actually partway through the telling of the story of Acts, you go to these kind of we passages where all of a sudden Luke, who is the author of Acts, begins to say, and we did this, and we saw this, and we encountered this. He goes from saying they, or naming people, to saying all of a sudden he jumps into the story. So he is an eyewitness to part of the story of the early church, and says so. He was a witness to the coming of age of the church. He was not a poor Jew, and he is evidence. He is in himself evidence that the gospel is for the whole world. And because of that, he wants, I think, to speak to his compatriots, to those who are like him, to craft the story of Jesus and the story of the early church, to write a gospel, to write the story of Jesus spoken to his own people. Now, so we're talking about educated, middle class, Gentile, and he wants to write a gospel for them. So immediately your mind might jump to thinking, oh, okay, he's going to write a gospel biased for them. It's exactly the opposite. What Luke wants to do, and maybe in a way that only a person from a certain people or from a certain ethnicity or from a certain community or from a certain nationality or from a certain place or from a certain demographic, only those people from within that community can be prophetic in a certain way. Only they can really actually say, these are our problems, these are our threats, these are our temptations, these are the lies we believe. And so he means to come for his people. And so he will write a gospel to this educated Gentile audience, middle and upper class audience, which prioritizes the poor and the marginalized and women. He will craft what he thinks is the right gospel for them. But he is, and he writes to them to be proof, evidence that the gospel is for everyone. It's for the whole world. It's for him. And he wants to tell that story. He was likely commissioned to do this, so he's probably not just doing it on his own, but somebody was pushing him. Most likely all of the living disciples would have said, we want you to do this. They would have backed him, maybe writing this out of Antioch, but they would have wanted to see this volume. My guess is, my assumption is they wanted him to write the story of the early church, but he wants to write this as a 2-volume. This is a choice that he makes, to write it as a 2-volume work. He wants to appeal to the mind, but he also wants to tell a supernatural story. Do you remember Scooby-Doo? Is that still around? Does anyone ever watch Scooby-Doo Mysteries? You remember the cartoon Scooby-Doo? I'm like, there's literally blank stares coming at me right now. Okay. All right. Anyway, a Scooby-Doo mystery is what they call it. They drove around in a van as a group of people, as a talking dog, sort of talking. He sort of talked, and they were always trying to uncover some sort of ghost story. You remember this? And it was always a mystery. But here's the thing that you maybe didn't realize or pick up on Scooby-Doo, if you watch Scooby-Doo. Is anyone, all right, who actually has watched the Scooby-Doo thing? Let's know each other here. Okay, why were you looking at me like that? What's wrong with you? Anyway, you know, at the end of a Scooby-Doo mystery, it's never a mystery. So it actually has this incredibly scientific view of the world. These ghost story mysteries, because in the end it was always just a guy with a mask on. It seemed like there was a ghost, but really it was just a dude with a mask. That's always what it was in the end. And there's a meta narrative in that that's basically saying when you think you've experienced something supernatural, it's never supernatural. It's actually something natural just masking itself as supernatural. And there is this battle, isn't there, in our minds and our consciousness, in the telling of the human story, between whether or not the supernatural is actually even real, between science and faith, this sort of false dichotomy. Wasn't it Nacho Libre and his friend's like, I don't believe in God, I believe in science. This is a dichotomy. It's a false dualism. I believe in science. I can't believe in God because I believe in science. I mean, has anyone heard that, or anyone experienced that dichotomy, that dualism? Like you have to believe in the one or the other. And that's just nonsense. In fact, part of what Luke wants to do, I think the label that he's putting on his gospel is a historical depiction of a supernatural story. He wants to say, look, I'm gonna approach this like a historian. And I'm gonna give you the best accounts and eyewitnesses that I possibly can, so it will satisfy the rational part of you, which says, did this really happen? Is this really true? Can we really believe this? So he says, okay, I'm going to do that. I want to do that. I'm not just trying to tell a faith story like Mark or John to a faith community. I will give you an orderly, historical account of these things which have been fulfilled among us. And guess what? Guess what you're going to see when I give you he's going to use the scientific method to tell this story. And in the end, it will be just as crazy. And there is no man with a mask. It is what you thought it was. I think this is his intention. It is the double dutch of truth. To believe, if you believe in science, really apply the scientific method to the marvel and the mystery of this life and the author of life, Jesus, you'll find a story so amazing it's unbelievable. And it feels unbelievable. And we like that word. I like the word unbelievable. We use the word unbelievable for things we believe. Do you know that? We use the word unbelievable for things we've seen with our own eyes. We watch some great event happen, or some I don't know, athlete accomplishes something. We look at each other and we go, that's unbelievable. Even though we believe it because we just saw it. But it moves into some sort of realm of like, could that really have happened? Like almost like we know that in the future retelling of the thing we just saw with our own eyes, we're going to look at each other and say, did that really happen? And yet it did happen. We know it happened. It's a true story, and yet it's an unbelievable story. And Luke wants us to wade into the waters of this narrative of the unbelievable and the true story of Jesus. It's not, strictly speaking, a rational story, because he's not just trying to say, I'm going to be rational and depict a rational series of events. He's saying, I'm going to be rational, but I'm going to depict things which our eyes cannot conceive, which our hearts did not dare believe was possible, and which future generations will look at us and say, did that really happen? Could that actually be true? This is on the face what I think he's trying to do. Narrative of the unbelievable true story of Jesus, on which our lives and this world depends. Is the air off? I feel hot. Okay. It's on, both of them? I feel sweaty. Do you have one of those? No, I'm just kidding. And that, I think, is the purpose of this prologue, the description of what he wants to do. But, having said that, there is something here, something below the surface, about doing something new. About, I don't know, taking on a task yourself, which others have done before you. The bravery of that, the hubris of that, something to unpack here. Something for us, for those of us that want to start something or have started something. There's something here for us. Many, he says, inasmuch, this is how the old translation, inasmuch as many have set out. Many have done this, he's saying. He's both admitting that other people have done this before me. He starts his whole gospel by saying, I'm not the first. I'm not the first. Others have done what I'm about to do. Why do it then? I mean, what's the motivation for even saying that? Unless you think you can do it better. And that is such a problematic thought for me. And I've wrestled with it. What is it? Why does he say, look, other people have done this? If he doesn't think, but I'm going to do it better. Why start like that? Why even do it? He knows there are other gospels, good ones too. Most likely he's using the Gospel of Mark. He probably has a copy of the Gospel of Matthew in his writing. He has that there next to him. That's one of the eyewitnesses. That's one of the accounts that he's considering. And why does he seems to need to justify this new contribution to the genre and to also label it for us? This is the purpose of the prologue, obviously, but do you really think you're going to do it better? Are you saying that the other ones are bad somehow? Is it just some kind of ego trip to like, I want one that I wrote that has Luke at the top? Why another gospel? Why plant another church? Why start another business? Why do another microchurch? Why another ministry to kids? Why another house in the inner city? Why? Why start anything? How will this one be different? Why another gospel? I mean, this is particularly difficult because if we believe, which we do now in retrospect, that these first two gospels that he has copies of were canon. They were inspired by God. They were not imperfect. So we can't say, well, Mark made a bunch of screw-ups. That's why I'm going to fix those. No, you have to say the Gospel of Mark is perfect in its construction and in what it teaches. So why? I mean, I just think this is so important. There's something here to understand for those of us that have the desire to start things. First of all, there is this pluralism in the first century, and there needed to be a more robust witness. Luke sees that. He's been trying to share this story, and he feels like more is needed, particularly to his own people, to Gentiles. People are asking, is it really true? That's fine that that's a Jewish story told to Jewish people by Jewish people, but that doesn't apply to us. It's not true to us. Of course he thought he could do it better. Of course. But that does not diminish what came before. And actually what he does in this prologue is actually give honor to the eyewitnesses and give honor to the other sources which he will use and build on. He's not saying, I don't agree with those and I'm going to start others, because there were some gospels which weren't true, which were rejected, but he's taking the good eyewitnesses and he's saying, I want to do something which is better, it is different, at least it's better for the people I know, at least it will work better for the people that I'm trying to talk to. But of course, he's not dismissing those former sources. He's actually standing on their shoulders. I think it was 9 years ago, this month, that we started the Underground. And to start, when we first gathered in a forum like this, we started with the Gospel of Luke. The first message I ever preached in a crucible kind of thing was this text. And I found it. I looked at it again. I don't think there's a recording of it anywhere. I guess we hadn't figured out how to record things yet or something. I don't know. But I reread it, and it was emotional for me to look at this text from a decade ago. And at the very beginning, that kind of Genesis moment for us when we said, let's try to do this. Let's step out and be something, start something. And I wrestled in that dialogue. I wrestled with why. Why start another church? Isn't there enough churches? I was just sort of trying to get back into what I was feeling. That tension of why start something new. Here's one of the things. Here's something that I said that morning. So we'll see if it still rings true. If we plant, I said, and if we set the trumpet of justice and love for the outcast and the poor to our lips, if we hold out the gospel as a gift and a challenge, if we are relentless in our application of the word to our lives in humility, will that not affirm churches that are making the same choices? If we plant a church that, as we best understand it, honors the work of Jesus in our city to bring transformation through sacrifice and love, then we have done what we have done, and we have only drawn a line. This is what conviction always does. We start this church standing on the shoulders of great churches of our city. We walk in solidarity with the churches who will preach the complete good news of the kingdom of God. We honor them and ask them to welcome us as a newborn sister. But like Luke, we have done our homework. We've investigated the unsearchable riches of grace in Jesus and the deranging evil of our city and our hearts. And we see that the one should inform the other, even alter it. We believe that the good news is hope for transformation. We know that our convictions will also challenge the complacent. While that is not our cause or our desire, it is the way it is. And that's fine. God is sovereign. Let him use whatever he wills to sharpen and chasten his people. More than being one church, we want to be innovators of church. We want to be church planters. Our DNA is to dismantle competitive motivations and affirm the smallest representation of church that we can find. To say to every small, worshiping, missional community, you are the church. And that can be bigger and more conventional churches too. Missional churches, parachurch organizations. We want to create an umbrella where every individual feels the weight of the glory of the mission of God on their life and asks the most important question a person can ask: who am I and what God do you want me to do? And then find people to do that thing with us. We underachieve because we have called gatherings church. And when church is really what we are, when we are surrendered to God together in mission, we are made to serve him. I see, on the one hand, that's hubris. Who do you think you are? I can almost say back to my younger self, who do you think you are? You're gonna be some sort of prophetic, you're gonna change the church, you're gonna do the church better. This thing which has existed for 2,000 years. And you're gonna do it better? But that's exactly what I thought. It's still kind of what I think. I haven't lost it entirely. But I actually see humility in this opening from Luke. And even though it may only have been a glimmer, I see it even in my own thoughts. This is a guide for starting things, for trying to change things. I see it then, I see it now. There's some spirit in Luke that wants to do something better for his people. But there is humility to see that he's not the first one, and that he's building on something that comes before him. But yes, he wants to make something. And at least for that time and that place and the people he knows, he wants to make it better. A more robust witness, a more profound witness to the people he knows. I wonder sometimes, if John Wesley were alive or Francis of Assisi were alive, would he like the underground? Would they like the underground? I just wonder. I wonder if they lived in Tampa in our time, if they were brought back from the dead. That'd be weird, but I don't know. It's just imagination. Would they want to be part of us? It's funny how things begin, because Jesus isn't dead. Jesus is alive, and he keeps reliving his life in his people in every generation. He keeps reliving. He keeps beginning again. And I wonder if those pioneers of the church in their time would have more in common with us than we realize. I hope that that's true. If they would like us, feel some kind of connection or affinity with us. I was in a room recently with some pretty, I don't want to use the word successful, but effective missionaries who have built kind of significant, works. And in this room of kind of really competent people, I was probably on the younger end of the room, so it was a little bit older crowd. People have been in ministry for a long time, accomplished quite a lot, and really had kingdom hearts, really want to see. But there was this one guy in the room, his name was Ralph Moore. I'd never heard of him. And as his story kept being told, he was sort of quiet. He's 70, and he's kind of quiet. He's not saying much. He's just sort of sitting there sheepishly. All I heard about him before I came in is he's an ex-hippie. That's what I heard. He's an ex-hippie. I'm not sure what that means, but There it is. I guess he came out of the Jesus movement or something. And so part of this discussion over the course of 2 days was to try to talk about what like multiplying, reproducing movements really look like in our day and age, in our time. But the problem is we just don't have, at least not in the United States context, we don't have a lot of examples. We have mega ministries which are led by mega personalities, and we can see people that can build something around their own brand. But we just don't see movements, empowering movements, just sort of seeping out into the culture and changing, transforming the world. And so we're looking for examples of this. And here's this guy kind of sitting there, and as he starts to tell his story, or they start telling a story, because everybody wants to, every time a question is asked, they want to turn to Ralph. Well, what do you think, Ralph? What do you think, Ralph? This is a room full of like egos, and they all want to talk to Ralph to find out what Ralph thinks. Now, it turns out this guy, just kind of quiet, he has a church of maybe 300, something like that, in Hawaii. That's actually where he is now, in Hawaii. But over the course of his ministry, they have planted 2,317 churches. I just literally cannot conceive that number in my mind. It's just what he does. He just empowers people, sends them. He's planted Baptist churches, Methodist churches, Presbyterian churches, Calvary Chapel churches, Vineyard churches. He doesn't care. I mean, I just think that's completely bizarre. And he's just this fascinating old dude, kind of a little weird, and sort of says things obtuse and people don't fully understand, and a little bit cagey and a little contrarian. But something happens, because then they tell the underground story, and there's definitely some like curiosity and interest in our story, because there is movement potential in what we're doing, and they see that. And there's sort of this multiplicative quality to what we're doing. And so they're sort of leaning on Ralph. But every time they ask Ralph a question, Ralph smirks and looks at me. And I'm across the room, and he just kind of keeps looking at me, like smiling at me. And he starts having this crush on me. Yeah, and he keeps saying, and I'm not a sexual, come on guys, but he starts saying, Brian, what do you think? Let's ask Brian. And he starts getting this thing with me. I don't know what it is. And then I hear him in the hall. He's like, you know what I really like about these meetings? Brian. That's what I like. Because, of course, I'm like cagey too and contrarian too. And everything everyone's saying, I say the opposite. And I want to challenge all these kind of conventions and notions. And he loves it. Every time I say something, he's just like getting excited. That's the thing that gets him excited. This old church planter who has this kind of radical kingdom DNA inside him, and there's probably very little we have in common in terms of the way we might, I don't know, the music we listen to, or the way we might interact with our friends of the world. But the truth is, there's something very deeply in common that he felt and we felt, and I felt this kind of affection from him and this strange affirmation. Everyone kept wanting to listen to him. He kept wanting to listen to me. Kept wanting to hear about us, about you, about what's going on here, the things which have been fulfilled among us. I feel like there is that, I don't know, that recycling, that rejuvenation of history to begin again in Jesus. And the truth is, this old movement planter saw himself in me. That's what he liked. A reminder of who he was. And he said, even to me as we left, he said, you have invigorated my faith. Because I remember this. I remember the way that you feel. This is a case for doing something sacred even better. Or at least better for a certain kind of person. And then there's this line which he says, it seemed good to me. And if there ever was like a line in the Bible which is just weird, it's that line. It seemed good to me. Why'd you do it? Why write this 2-volume? Why try to do a gospel better? Why try to tell the story of the church which no one else has done before? Why do it? Well, if you ask Luke, it just seemed like a good idea. That's it. There's no light from heaven. There was no, Acts 13, and the elders called his name and brought him in and laid their hands upon him, and the Spirit of God fell, and you knew you were supposed to write this 2-volume history. No, it just seemed like a good idea. That's what he's saying. He said, it just seemed like some people said maybe I should do it. I thought, man, yeah, okay, maybe. I don't know, that seems like a good idea. Does anybody relate to that? Does anybody relate to like the way you started the ministry you're currently starting is it just kind of seemed like a good idea? There was no light from heaven. Heaven and earth didn't split. You maybe thought you might have heard God sort of say something, maybe. But even that you shy away from. I'm sure Luke felt some confirmation from the Holy Spirit. But the truth is, when he goes to tell the story, he's not going down that road. The Lord spoke to me and he said, thus these shall do for thine servant for me. He just goes, it just seemed like a good idea. I love that so much. This is Scripture. When God takes something that just seemed like a good idea to a guy and builds the world around it. And this is the humility of a project that we hope will change the world. Yes, we all hold and harbor in our hearts this thing which we've started, the microchurch you're a part of, even the movement you're a part of. Yes, we wanted to change the world, but we don't start like that. We don't start like, they're better than everyone. We're hoping. It just seemed like a good idea. And yes, of course, deep in our hearts, we hope that God will build something around it. You are a prophetic movement. Prophetic means we hear the voice of God and challenge things that are wrong or broken. We start things because we fight for something. And that's a distinction. We fight for something. We see something wrong and we work to make it right. And this is, I think, the core work of the kingdom. It's the core work of evangelism, of healing, and of preaching. We speak to the bent things of this world and command them to be straight. To the heart that is darkened by lies and lust, and we say, there's another way, there's a better way. We're challenging something that's wrong. We're not just trying to do a thing which already exists in a different way or a better way, but we're actually looking at something that's broken or bent in the world and saying that isn't good, that isn't right, we must change it. Someone must do something about it. That's why we start things. We are, I think, I'm going to say this as a generalization, we are, individual giftedness aside, we are a movement of prophets. What you're doing is prophetic. The choice to step into a world or a place where the gospel doesn't exist, where light is not shining, where justice is not flowing like a river. We step into those places and we say, this isn't right, someone must change it, we're here. And yet that makes you prophets. And all that comes with. As prophets, their lives are always threatened and they're not popular, you understand. And the other thing you must know, you need to know about prophets is that prophets faint and grow weary. And we even change over time. We become different over time. 9 years ago when I preached on this text, I told a story about Luke. Is Luke here? Luke's like my favorite subject. He's in the back, okay. So Luke would have been what? He would have been first day of school. When we first did this, he was that August, he was taking his first day into kindergarten. And the story I told was about him crying at kindergarten. We took him to kindergarten. Some kids are like, school, I can go, I'm big, I'm going to go. And some kids are like, I hate you for doing this to me. Why are you sending me into this evil, dark world and abandoning me? I think there's two kinds of people, actually. I think there's people that cry at first grade and there's people that love first grade. But anyway, that's a separate issue. Well, he was like breaking down. He was just like, no, don't do it. Don't put me in here. Don't send me in here. And we had to really like cajole him to get him to go into kindergarten. I mean, he was so afraid, so afraid. And Luke has always had this kind of tender heart, and so to watch him struggle like that was so difficult. I remember saying to him, what I actually said to him that day was, son, you need to have courage. You need courage, and here's what I'm going to do. I have courage, so I'm going to let you borrow some of my courage. I'm going to give you some courage. And so right now, today, you don't feel courage, but I'm going to give you some of mine. I'm going to loan you some of mine. And so that got him through the first few days of school. Well, times have changed. In fact, when I look at all my kids, I'm just like, wow. The difference between then and now is incredible. A decade, what a difference a decade makes. This kid now is like a complete danger freak. In fact, if you can get injured doing it, he wants to do it. And you have to hold him back from doing anything that's super dangerous. I'll just give you one example. We were in Virginia, and we went to this trail, and in the trail they had this kind of bathroom. It was sort of a bathroom, but it was really like a hole with a bathroom built around it, and it was like this big, huge, cavernous, what do you call those? Latrine, outhouse, something like that. And it was just, you know what I'm talking about. It's just a hole, and what's down there is just down there. And so he goes in there, uses the bathroom, and there's a sign. This is a bad idea, but there's a sign. Maybe it works for some people. It doesn't work for Luke. There's a sign that says, "Do not throw lit matches into the hole." So I'm assuming here for a second that we're talking about a lot of methane buildup and that sort of thing. It's a bomb basically down there. It's a incendiary below you. And so they're just trying to say, guys, don't put fire in here. It could be bad things. So he leaves the outhouse thing, and he comes and finds me. He's like, "Dad, I have to put a match in the hole." And I'm like, "What is wrong with you? What exactly is wrong with you?" He's like, "I don't know. I read the sign, and I can't stop thinking about it. I have to do it. I have to do it. I have to find a match, and I have to put it in the hole." I'm like, "But son, think about it for a second. It's possible they put that sign there because you could die, or it could be a bomb or blow up." He's like, "I know. That's why I want to do it." Can you imagine how awesome that would be? I say to him, he wants to get a motorcycle, and I say to him, "Son, you're going to get a motorcycle and you are going to crash it because that's what you do. You crash things. That's who you are. That's what you do." He's like, "I know. I love that." He's not even trying to hide it. He's not even like, "No, Dad, I'll be so safe on the motorcycle. I will be." No, he's like, "I know. I can't wait." This child has changed in 10 years. Or maybe he hasn't. Maybe he's overcompensating for something that has not changed. He is so brave now. Maybe because deep inside he does not want to be that scared little boy anymore. I don't know. Because even our strengths belie our frailty. And when we are prophets and we say to the world, you ought to care about orphans. You ought to care about women who are caught in trafficking or sex industry. You ought to care about people with dissociative disorder or people with mental illness. You ought to care about the homeless. You ought to care. This is our prophetic thing. People don't care. They should care. We ought to care. The church should care. The world should care. We're prophets. But the truth is, we're also fighting back our own apathy. There's what appears as strength is still often our own uncertainty, our own struggles. I say it this way, we are prophetic, but we're humble too. We are humble prophets, human prophets. If you look at the story of prophets throughout the Bible, prophets appear when they're needed. God sort of just calls them out when they're needed in time and history. But they're just regular people, given an extraordinary task. They're given a voice that's bigger than themselves. And when they speak with that voice, they seem otherworldly. But the truth is, they go home and do the dishes and cook their dinners, just like the rest of us. You look at people like Jeremiah or Elijah, these fainting prophets, these prophets that grow tired. They were just people too, flawed, weak. But when they stood in the presence of God, when we stand in the presence of God, we're different. We're more. But still we faint. If you want to start something, This is like a takeaway here. If you want to start something, you should decide how you're going to make it better. You shouldn't just start a thing to start a thing. You should start it because there's actually something wrong that you want to make right. I think that great entrepreneurs, great apostolic people within the church and outside the church should care about making things better. They should be correcting something. All creation is prophetic. It says the world isn't right without this. And if you want to start something, you should go back to the beginning. Luke was not part of the original 12, so the whole enterprise belongs to us. It represents, like what Scott said, that we can do this. We can take the story of Jesus and make it somehow our own. We can retell his story through the actions of our lives. And we can bring about the kingdom of God, bring about the presence of Jesus in the world by starting something in our world, our sphere, which isn't right. We can do that. And if you want to start something, you should begin with the story of Jesus. If you want to start something, a church, a ministry, a business, a kingdom purpose, if you want to start a relationship for that matter, if you want to start a new job, anything, you want to start anything, move into a new neighborhood, here's what you should do. Here's the advice from Luke. Here's what you do. Remember and retell the stories of Jesus. Before you do it, I'm saying, okay, you want to start dating someone. Before you do it, remember the stories of Jesus. Go back and read again, enter into again the stories of Jesus. His life is life. His ideas, his heart, his way, his spirit is our only hope for anything, for a good relationship, for a new kind of business, for starting a microchurch, for anything. He is the only hope for us. He is a sun shining on the darkness of our own uncertainty, a shield against the doubts of inadequate relationships and failed attempts at righteousness. When you start something, especially something others have done before you, there's so much unknowing in it. What will happen? Will I make it? Will I fail? Will it be successful? There is this desire for certainty. And this is Luke's gift, a deep and thorough look at Jesus. If you've ever felt doubt, if you feel doubt now, if you feel uncertainty now, start with Jesus. Go back to the beginning and look at Jesus. When prophetic, if you've already started something, because some of you are on the brink of beginning something, and some of you aren't. You're like me, you're 10 years in, and you're looking at the thing which you started before, and you're reconsidering it. And when prophetic events are fulfilled among you, you ought to stop and take note of it, to order it, to retell it, so you can be certain of what you've been taught. And by the way, if you're several years in, like me or like some of us, into something that you have started and you start to have doubts about yourself, about your work, if you're this feeling of holding off futility, what's the point? Does it really make a difference? Some of you are trying to keep despair at bay one day at a time. Luke has a word for you too. Go back to Jesus. Certainty is the promise that Luke wants to make sense of all the things we've seen and experienced, the miracles and the mistakes, all the things which have been fulfilled among us. He wants to go back and he wants to relook at the story of Jesus. Because here's the thing, they asked him, I'm sure of this, they asked him to tell the story of the early church, but he says, I can't do that if I don't first tell the story of Jesus. I can't tell the story of the church, Acts, without first telling the gospel story, because that's where the story of the church begins. It's where your story begins. And if you feel lost, if you feel confused, if you feel that certainty slipping away, or if you feel despair creeping in like the dusk, guess what? Go back and read and know and remember the story of Jesus. I think also of Eve, who's also changed a lot in 10 years, gone through a lot. If you would have told me 10 years ago the struggles that this beautiful, vivacious, creative, brilliant little girl was going to have, I probably could not have been able to hear you. But the truth is, she has had her battles. her struggles with life and with her own mind. And if you've seen Eve, and she doesn't mind me telling this story because it's obvious to her. If you see Eve, you can see all these kind of scars on her arms. And she's such a bold person. She, in a very real sense, is the opposite of Luke. She just doesn't do anything without full, total, utter commitment, including when she feels sad or despair. And recently, she tried to get a job at Starbucks, and so she goes to the interview. And I think Starbucks is a pretty good company. She actually all my kids worked at Chick-fil-A before, and that's a really good company. So she goes to try to get this job at Starbucks, and the manager seems to really like her, and it seems to be going well, and so Eve asks the question. She's sort of asking about dress code and that sort of thing, and so Eve asks the questions, do you need me to cover up these scars on my arms? And this is how Eve told the story, but she said that this manager stopped, looked at her. I just want you to take this in for a second. This hiring manager stopped and looked at her and said, don't you ever cover up. You never have to cover up. That's a part of your past, and you never should be ashamed. It makes you who you are. I just got chills as she told me that. I just think, who is this person speaking prophetically into the life of my daughter? We have to go back to Jesus. Not to just make sense of the supernatural, the beauty, the growth, but to make sense of the scars of our lives. If you've been doing ministry for a while and you feel faint and it's tiring to keep being the one saying something that no one's doing and challenging a problem that no one seems to want to challenge. People like things as they are, business as usual. And if through that experience you have gotten some scars, because you have, I have, and they're deep, and they still itch, and I'm aware of them, and you're aware of them. And the truth is, we can't cover them up. We shouldn't cover them up. Instead, what we should do is we desperately need Jesus to reinterpret those scars. Not just the highs, not just all the things that we've accomplished to say, God did that. Every time something great happens in ministry and we look back and we remember fondly, yeah, remember that happened, the growth, the miracles, the change of people's lives. We always say, yeah, God did that. But the truth is, even the mistakes, even the failures, even the scars we bear, we have to see Jesus in those things. At work in us, through those things somehow. So does Eve. Guys, the truth is, we don't just need to read the story of Jesus that happened 2,000 years ago in Palestine. Not just go back to that beginning. Because he's still living in you and in me, in his church, in his people. We can go back and actually retell the story of Jesus many times, thousands of times over the years, over the course of history, because he keeps reinventing himself. He keeps doing it better. And it's not to say that the way that the church was done before is wrong. It's to say in this time, it has to be done differently. We have to do it differently. In the neighborhood you live in the place where you work, in the people or the demographic that you care about, it's like, no, that the gospel has not come fully. The light has not fully dawned in that place. And we have to say it isn't right. And we want it to be right, so we put ourselves there. And every time we do that, we're going back to the beginning. We're actually giving honor to anyone else who did the same thing in their time. We're reliving even what Luke wants to do here. We're holding on to that spirit which says, yeah, it was good what Mark wrote for his community and what Matthew wrote for his community and what John will go on to write for his community, but I have to do something for my community. I have to write something for my people. And yes, I think it's better. Not because I think those things are wrong or bad. I'll use them. We're the same ilk. We're the same family. But I have to do something to say, in a sense, to everyone in the whole world, the gospel is for you. The gospel is for you. Who are you? You, who are you? Who has God made you to be? Where do you come from? What is your history? What are your scars? What is your ethnicity? What is your family? What is your heritage? That's exactly where God wants you to make the church. To build somehow a community that represents Jesus coming again. Jesus beginning again. And if you want to do that, if you are doing that, go back to the very beginning. Remember the story of Jesus so that you can tell your own story. Wouldn't it be something if you felt your life was so intertwined with Jesus Christ that you simply could not tell your own story without starting with his? Because that's how Luke feels. If someone sits you down and says, tell me about yourself, you say, well, how far do you want me to go back? Well, go back to the beginning. Okay, well, if you want me to go to the beginning, it all began with John the Baptist. What? Well, that's where my story begins. My story begins with a voice crying in the wilderness, with a hungry world looking for someone to save them. And God stepped into that world, and he himself gave his own life, his own son, for the world, for the ransom of many. And guess what? And then let me tell you my story. Let me tell you how I was lost. Let me tell you how I was wayward. And that one that I just told you about, he saved me. He found me. I can't tell you my story without telling you his story. It's not possible. But we always begin our story with ourselves. And if Luke took that commission and said, write the story of the early church, and if he began with Pentecost, he would have mistakenly told the story of the early church, because the early church's story begins with the Son. And it is a 2-volume story. It is the story of the coming of the Son and a story of the coming of the Spirit and the people of God. And you cannot tell the story of the coming of the Spirit of the people of God without first telling the coming of the incarnation of the Son of God. And this too is our story. Let me invite up the worship team. I know I need to finish. He wants to make that beginning in you today. Or if he already has made that beginning, he wants you to remember it. Can you remember do you remember the first time you read the Gospels? I mean, the first time you really read about the life of Jesus. Do you remember how you felt? I do. And I'm still, when I'm in my right mind and when I read the stories of Jesus, stories that have become well known to me and to my heart, there's still this sort of newness to it, this life that comes back into me. To really just be amazed again at this person. His life, his words, his way. The way he was with people, the way he was with God, the way he was with sinners, the way he was with the powerful, everything. I actually don't have words. We just need to go back there. We need to read again, remember again these stories, this person. I just think somehow for us, whether we're starting something now or whether we're into a thing which we started before, both of us, we need to go back to this story of this man, of the coming of Messiah, Emmanuel, to ransom captive Israel and us, to find again our story in that story. And I think, too, that we're always in danger, and I'll just finish with this thought. We're always in danger when we feel like we know that story, or the work of ministry, or the work of the church or community or whatever just becomes something we know. And we want to move on, to Paul, and then we want to move on to other extra-canonical theology. We want to grow out of the gospel, grow out of the story of Jesus. And I don't know anything that's more toxic to the human heart, to the Christian heart, than to feel like you move on from the life and story of Jesus. But we do. And one of the things that happens to us, one of the signs signs that we've drifted from the heart and spirit of Jesus, when we start caring more about theology than we do about actually the living of the life of Jesus in the world, when we care more about our petty doctrinal differences than we actually do about reaching the world, about dying for the world, about being blessed and broken and given to the world, when we stop being missionaries and we start being church people, theologians. There is a pettiness to the church which still exists, and it creeps in on us. And we start looking at each other and start saying what we don't like or agree with each other. And this hasn't been a massive problem for the underground, but I want to be warned. I want to say never do it. When we start looking at each other and criticizing each other's ideas or each other's modes of ministry or each other's doctrine, we're dead. We're dead in the water. January 11, 2002, a U.S. Airways pilot called Woody Manier was doing a routine flight. He was checking in a routine flight in Philadelphia's airport to fly to Minneapolis. And there was kind of heightened awareness at the time, and so TSA was checking him, and they went through his stuff, and they found some tweezers. So they were going to confiscate his tweezers. And they interrogated him. Why do you have tweezers? Why do you have these tweezers? What are you doing with the tweezers? This is a pilot. Do you understand? Why do you have these tweezers? He responded with a question. Now, the question was probably a little bit cutting, a little bit jaded, but the question that he asked them got him arrested. He was taken away, put in jail overnight. He was suspended from U.S. Airways. And this is what he said. This was his question to them. Sarcastically, when pressed about his tweezers, this is what he said. Why are you worried about tweezers when I can crash the plane? I could not agree more. And I guess they arrest you for stuff like that. Jesus, I think, didn't worry about the tweezers. The early church, I think, didn't worry about the tweezers. Guys, don't worry about the tweezers. Worry about the crashing planes. The church should not be worried about the tweezers. Jesus put it this way, you Pharisees, you strain a gnat and swallow a camel. The great threat to mission is to forget the story and the life, the simplicity and the power of the life and person of Jesus in you, in your story, and to become petty. To begin to strain gnats and care about tweezers when people can crash planes. This morning, as we come to the table, as we remember this great sacrifice of Jesus, as we begin this study again of the gospel, as we start again as a community, as we invite people into the study of this book again, the stories of Jesus, and this will take us a while. Probably not quite a year, but it'll take us 9 or 10 months to finish this book. I want to almost invite you in your heart to say yes to this journey again, this long look at the life and person of Jesus, and to let it reinvigorate your life, to let it reinvigorate your faith, to let it put aside your doubts, to let it reinvigorate your sense of mission, your calling to the crashing planes of the world. And the night he was betrayed, after giving thanks, Jesus took thanks. He took bread and he broke it and he said, "This is my body which is broken for you. Eat it to remember me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup and he said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for the forgiveness of sins. Drink it to remember me." I don't know what you need to feel or hear this morning as you come to the table, but I'm asking that you would call out to Jesus. In fact, just bow your head for a second. Lord Jesus, We want you. We need you. We need a fresh revelation of you. We need to see you again in our lives. We need your story to be the beginning, the middle, and end of our story. We're hungry again to look at you, to know you. Like children, we want to come back to your story and see it again for the first time with eyes like a child. We want to be novices again in ministry and life. Return us to our first love. And even as we come to this table, which we've done many times before, we want there to be a newness to it. When these elements enter our bodies, we want it to feel like fresh, new life given to us. So guys, when you're ready, this is the body and blood of Jesus given for you. Take and eat.